A farmer pried open his attic trap door. A pregnant widow was hiding in the rafters. The rope pull on the trap door had been cut. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Somebody had taken a knife to it, clean diagonal cut, not frayed, and tied a new loop with something thin and dark, a bootlace maybe, so the door would still hang level and not catch the eye. I stood on the top rung of the ladder with my hand on the frame, and I didn't move for a long moment. Wind was pushing under the eaves. October wind, the kind that finds every gap in old boards and makes a sound like breathing. I'd gone up for seed corn, that was all. The attic ran the full length of the barn's loft, and I kept sacks up there through the dry months. Corn, some dried beans, 2 tins of hardtack I'd put by the previous winter and never touched. The ladder creaked the same creak it always did, and I'd had my mind on nothing in particular. Just the seed corn and whether it had stayed dry enough, and whether I'd have to drive it into town before the first hard freeze. Then I saw the rope and I stopped. I didn't call out. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because if it was something dangerous, calling out wouldn't help me. Maybe because something in the quality of the silence above me, the particular way it sat there, heavier than empty silence, already told me what I was about to find wasn't dangerous. Wasn't a man anyway. I pushed the door the rest of the way open and raised my head through. She was in the far corner up under the pitch of the roof, sitting on an old horse blanket she'd pulled from the pile near the chimney chase. Both her hands were flat against the floorboards beside her, braced, as if she'd push herself further back through the wall if she could. Her coat was a man's coat, dark wool, too large, the collar turned up around her jaw. Her hair was loose and there was dust in it from the rafters. And her belly she was carrying low, and she was carrying full, close. The kind of close where you start to wonder about days rather than weeks. We looked at each other. My name is Harlan Briggs. I've farmed this quarter section for going on 22 years. I was 54 years old that October. My wife Dorothea had been gone 11 years, Hart took her, and I'd been running the place alone since. My son had gone to Denver. We wrote letters at Christmas. The neighbors nearest me were the Collette family, and they were 7 miles east. I am telling you this so you understand what kind of life I had built for myself up to that point. A quiet one, a careful one, a life where nothing much happened because I had arranged it so. She said, "Please don't put me out." Her voice was steady. That was the first thing that struck me about her, that she said it steady, not crying, not begging exactly, just stating a fact. Like she'd already thought through the worst of it and come out the other side into some place flat and plain. I said, "How long have you been up here?" 3 nights. I thought about that. I'd been in the barn 2 of those 3 days mending a fence rail, checking the mare's left foreleg. I'd walked under this loft with no idea. "You're cold," I said. She didn't answer that. "Come down," I said. "I'll put something on the stove." She didn't move. Her hands were still braced on the boards. "I'm not going to put you out in the dark," I said. "Come down." She studied me for another moment. The kind of studying a person does when they have been wrong about a face before and they are making sure they are reading this one right. Then she shifted herself sideways, got a knee under her, and I came up through the trap door the rest of the way and helped her to her feet. Her name was Ruth Alcott. Her husband had been a freighter out of Laramie, hauling for one of the mining outfits up in the hills. He'd been dead 7 weeks, axle sheared on a mountain grade, wagon rolled, and that was the end of Calvin Alcott. She had nothing from the freight company, nothing from his family, who she had never met and who she said she had no reason to expect anything from. She had sold what she could from the house he rented. She had 70 cents and a carpet bag with 1 change of clothes, and a Bible her mother had given her. And she had been walking west-southwest when the cold found her, and she'd seen my barn from the road. She told me this at my kitchen table, while I stood at the stove and fried salt pork, and heated what was left of that morning's coffee. She told it plain, no flourish, the way people tell a thing when they're too tired to shape it into anything more than the bare facts of it. I set the plate in front of her and poured the coffee and sat across the table and didn't say anything while she ate. She ate everything on the plate. She didn't apologize for it. When she was done, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me and said, "How far is the next town?" 18 miles south, I said. Dry wells. There's a stage that comes through Tuesday and Friday. Today is what? Sunday. She sat with that. I said, "There's a spare room. Used to be my son's. You can have it while you get your feet under you." She looked at me the way she'd looked at me in the attic. That same careful reading of a face. "That's a kindness," she said. "I want to be straight with you about what I can and cannot offer in return. I can cook. I can sew. I can work as long as I'm able to work." She touched the side of her belly with one hand, brief, matter of fact. "After, I'll need a short while, but I'll earn my keep." "I know you will," I said. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she said, "All right," and that was that. I am going to tell you what that winter was, because I don't think I could make you understand the rest of it without telling you that. I had been alone a long time. 11 years is a long time to eat at one end of a table and hear only the sounds you yourself make and go to bed with the same four walls and no voice in them. I had made a life of it. I don't say I suffered. I had my work. I had my land. I had the particular satisfaction of a thing done right with your own hands, which is its own company. But there is a difference between a man alone who is content and a man alone who has simply forgotten what the other thing feels like. Ruth Alcott reminded me. She was up before me most mornings. I'd come out to the kitchen and the stove would already be going and there would be a smell in the house, coffee, something baking, the smell of a house with a person in it, which is different from the smell of a house with just a man in it. Different in a way I can't make you fully understand with words. You'd have to have been there. You'd have to have been without it for 11 years. She didn't talk much at first. We worked around each other carefully, politely, the way people do when they are not yet sure of the rules between them. I went to the barn in the mornings and she did the house. In the afternoons she'd sometimes sit near the front window and mend things. I had a pile of mending that had grown for years, shirts with blown-out elbows, a quilt that had come apart at a seam, work gloves with the fingers worn through. She went through that pile without being asked. One evening I came in from checking the cattle and she'd rearranged the kitchen, moved a shelf, rehung 2 pots so they came to hand better. She looked at me when I came in and said, "I should have asked." Not apologetic exactly, just acknowledging it. I looked at the shelf. It was better where she'd put it. "It's fine," I said. After supper that night she told me about Calvin. Not much, just pieces. He had been 10 years older than her. He had been a man who moved, she said, always the next run, the next contract, the next outfit. She said it without bitterness, just as information. She had been married 3 years and she had spent most of it keeping house in a town where she knew almost no one and waiting for him to come back from wherever the freight was going. "Were you happy?" I said. I didn't mean to say it, it just came out. She considered the question. "I was making the best of a situation," she said finally, "which is not the same thing." I didn't say anything to that. "Were you," she said, "with your wife?" "Yes," I said, and that was true and she could hear it was true. "Good," she said. "That's good." And she said it like she meant it, like she was genuinely glad for it for me, which was an odd thing to be given. Being glad for someone you barely knew, for a happiness they'd had and lost. The baby came on a Thursday night in the 3rd week of November, 12 days before I'd expected it. I had gone to bed. The wind had been working at the house all day, that flat driving wind that comes down off the high country and doesn't quit, and I was tired in my bones in the way that cold wind makes you tired. I was asleep, and then I was not asleep, and I was lying in the dark listening, and something was different. Some sound had changed. I got up. I was in her doorway with my lantern before I was fully awake. She was sitting up in the bed, both hands pressed flat to the mattress on either side of her, and she looked at me with a face that was very calm and very controlled, and she said, I think tonight. I will not tell you I knew what I was doing. I didn't. Dorothea and I had wanted children and they hadn't come, and I had been present at the births of calves and foals, but that is not the same thing. What I knew was what needed doing in the next 5 minutes, which was get water hot and get clean cloth and stay in the room and not leave her alone. I did those things. It took most of the night. She was quiet through it in a way that cost her. I could see what it cost her, the way her jaw set, the way she breathed around it. She held my hand at one point, not asking for permission, just took it and held it, and I held back. Just before 4 in the morning, in the gray dark with the wind still going at the house, the baby came. A girl. Small, red-faced, furious at the world from the first instant, which I have since come to think is an accurate first impression of the world. I wrapped her the way I'd seen done at the ranch where I worked when I was young. Ruth held out her arms and I laid the baby in them and stepped back and stood there at the foot of the bed with the lantern, not sure what to do with myself. Ruth looked down at the baby. She put her cheek against the top of the baby's head. She was crying. Quiet crying, not the kind that asks for anything, just the kind that happens when the body has gone through something enormous and lets it out the only way it can. She looked up at me after a while. "Thank you," she said. I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "She's a strong one." Ruth looked back down at the baby and smiled. "She is." I went and put more wood on the stove and stood in the kitchen for a while, and I will tell you that I was not myself. Something had happened to me in that room that I did not have the language for and have not had since. I had been needed in a way I had not been needed in 11 years, and the need had come to me in my own house, in my own hands, and I had met it. That is not a small thing. For a man of my age and my particular life, that is not a small thing at all. She named the baby May. May Alcott. I did not say anything about the name. It was her business and her name to give. December was hard that year. 2 of my cattle got through a fence in a blow, and I lost 3 days finding them. The pump froze twice. The road into town turned to something between mud and ice that a horse could barely cross. We were snowed in for the better part of a week in the middle of the month, and I was burning wood faster than I liked. Ruth was up and moving inside a week of May's birth, which was too soon, and I told her so. "I've rested enough," she said. "You haven't," I said. She looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "Harlan, I know my body." I let it go. You learned with Ruth when to let things go. What I noticed was how she did it. She didn't push hard at first. She carried May in the sling she'd made from cut cloth, and she did things with one hand when she needed to, and she sat down when she was tired without making a performance of sitting down. She was sensible about herself. Calvin Alcott had not deserved a woman that's sensible about herself, but that was not my business to say. Christmas came. I had not put up anything for Christmas in years. I wasn't sure I owned anything to put up, but Ruth found a string of tin bells in the chest in the spare room. They had been Dorothea's. I had forgotten they existed, and she hung them on the mantel. She made molasses cookies and left them to cool on the back of the stove, and the smell of them was something I had not smelled in so long that, when I came in from the barn and encountered it, I stopped in the doorway and just stood there for a moment. She was at the table nursing May, and she looked over and saw my face and said, "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Good smell." She looked at me a moment more, that reading look, and then went back to May. After supper, I got out the bottle of rye I kept for medicinal purposes. I am being honest about how rarely I used it, and poured 2 glasses and set one in front of her without asking. She raised an eyebrow. "It's Christmas," I said. She picked up the glass. We sat for a while without talking, which was easy between us by then. She said, "I owe you more than I can say." "You don't owe me anything." "Harlan." "I mean it. You've been running this house since November. I eat better than I have in years. The mending pile's gone. You're earning it." She shook her head. Not arguing, just saying she knew the difference between what was practical exchange and what was something else. "I was in your rafters," she said. "You could have put me out." "I wasn't going to do that. A lot of men would have." I thought about that. I supposed that was true. "What would you have done," I said, "if I had?" She looked at the glass in her hand. "Kept walking," she said. "I had 70 cents, and 70 cents would have gotten me as far as Dry Wells, and then I'd have had to figure out Dry Wells." She paused. "I'd have managed. I manage." I believed her. She was the kind of woman who manages. But I was glad she didn't have to manage that way. January was quieter. The deep cold came and we got into a rhythm that fit the cold: early to bed, up before light, the day structured around keeping the stock fed, and the house warm and May sleeping and eating and growing. She was growing fast. By January she was already looking at the world with an alertness that seemed too big for her age. She'd fix on your face and study it the way her mother studied faces, and the resemblance made me smile even when I wasn't trying to. Ruth saw me smile at the baby one morning, watched me making a fool of myself in the way people make fools of themselves over babies, and she didn't say anything, but I caught the look on her face, and it was fond. She looked fond, like something she was watching was something she was glad about. I started talking to May. I don't know when it started, just something you do. She'd be on the blanket near the stove, and I'd come in from outside and crouch down and say something to her, explain what I'd been doing, what the weather was doing, what the cattle were doing. Ruth came in one afternoon and stood in the doorway and listened to me telling May that the south pasture fence would need mending in the spring, and that we'd do it together and she could watch. And when I looked up, Ruth was in the doorway with an expression I didn't quite know how to read. "What?" I said. "Nothing," she said, but she was smiling. I started thinking, somewhere in February, I can't tell you the exact day, can't point to a moment, about what happened in the spring. What happened when the road opened and the stage ran regular again. What Ruth's plan was, whether she had one, whether she wanted one. I did not know how to ask that. It seemed too large to just put on the table like a question about the weather or the cattle. What I did instead, in early February, was ride into Dry Wells on a day the road was passable and speak to Ike Collette at the land office, because there was a parcel adjacent to mine that had been sitting empty 2 years since its owner went back east. I had thought about that parcel before, off and on, the way you think about things you want but can't see the use for. 20 acres of good flat ground, creek access, backing up to my south fence. I came home that evening and didn't say anything about it. I thought for another week. Then one night after supper, May was asleep. The house was quiet. Ruth was at the table with her mending. I sat down across from her and said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it plain, without worrying about what I might want to hear." She set down the mending. She looked at me. "What are you planning," I said, "come spring?" She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that," she said. "I know you have." "I haven't landed anywhere definite." I said, "There's a parcel south of my fence line. 20 acres, creek water, good soil. It's been sitting since Herschel Payne went back east. I had a conversation with Ike Collette about it." She was watching me carefully. "I don't have any claim on what you do," I said. "I want to be clear about that. You are a free woman and you have your own mind, and I am not trying to arrange your life for you. But I am also not going to sit here and pretend I haven't thought about what this house was before you came, and what it is now, and the difference between those two things." She didn't say anything. "I'd like you to stay," I said. "Whatever arrangement makes sense to you. If you want that parcel for yourself and May and your own piece of ground, I'll help you get it built and worked. If you want something else, a different arrangement, I'd hear that too. I'm not a young man, and I know that, and I'm not asking you to see me any different than I am. But I'd like you to stay." The lamp was between us on the table, and it lit the lower half of her face and threw shadow on her eyes, and I couldn't read her expression as well as I usually could. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she looked at me, and she didn't say anything for long enough that I started to think I'd miscalculated the whole thing. Then she said, "I knew in November. I think I knew when you put the plate in front of me and sat down and didn't say anything while I ate." She paused. "A man who lets a person eat without making them account for themselves while they're doing it, that told me something about you." I didn't know what to say. "I've been waiting," she said, "for you to get around to saying what you just said." She picked up the mending again, looked at it, set it back down. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." I did not make a speech. I am not a man who makes speeches. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, and she turned her hand over and held it. We sat like that for a while with the lamp between us and May sleeping in the other room, and the cold outside doing whatever the cold does, and I was not thinking about any of it. I was thinking about nothing at all, which is a different thing from feeling nothing. It was the opposite of feeling nothing. It was the particular fullness that doesn't need words put to it. We were married in the spring by the circuit preacher, who came through in April. Ruth wore a dress she'd made from cloth I'd bought in Dry Wells in March, blue, the color of the sky about an hour after dawn, which is different from midday blue and different from evening blue, and is a particular blue that I associate with her still. May was 4 months old and had opinions about the ceremony and expressed them. The preacher's horse was nervous about May's opinions. It was not the most solemn proceeding you've ever seen. I did not buy the south parcel. I didn't need to. Ruth moved her 2 dresses and her Bible and her carpet bag from the spare room to my room, and that was the whole of it. We worked the farm together for the next many years. The farm did well. I think the farm did better because of her. There is a particular energy that comes into a place when it is working towards something rather than just maintaining itself. And that is what we were, a place working towards something. We built a 2nd bedroom for May and later a proper parlor, and we put a porch on the south side of the house where you could sit in the evening and watch the light go off the pasture. May grew. She grew fast and she grew opinionated, and she had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of reading a face and studying it until she was sure she had it right. She called me Papa from the time she could say it, which she decided on her own and which was not asked for, and which I did not deserve and which I accepted anyway. There is a particular thing that happens to a man who has lived a long time in a life that has gotten smaller and quieter and more alone, and that thing is, he starts to believe the smaller, quieter life is all there was ever going to be. Not as a thought, not as something he says, just as the weight of the days. The way the place looks when you come in from the barn and there's no light in the windows. The way a table sounds with one person at it. I am an old man now. The farm is still mine, though I don't work it the way I used to. May is grown with children of her own and she lives 12 miles north of here. Ruth is in the house behind me. I can hear her in the kitchen, can hear the specific sound of her moving in a kitchen, which I have been hearing for 20-odd years, and which I hear still as something I would notice if it stopped. I did not plan any of it. I went up that ladder to get seed corn, and I found a woman in my rafters, and I put a plate in front of her and we ate, and then we did the next thing that needed doing, and then the thing after that. That is most of what a life is, I think, doing the thing in front of you. And some of those things, if you do them right and don't turn away from them, turn out to be everything. I hear her in the kitchen. I'm going in.